Just getting ready for the start of this second session of free practice. John, we've got all the information in front of us here, but we can never tell really what these times on a Friday mean, how they signify what it will mean for qualifying. We can only really get a rough idea, can't we?
Well, what the usual form on a Friday is that the top teams spend Friday morning and probably the second part, or the best part of the second part of the session this afternoon, to do the work for the Grand Prix. Now, come the end of this session, they may take some of the fuel out, or may just let the fuel run down. They may run a second set of there's two choices of tyres. Whichever one they've gone with, they'll run a second set of, and just get a benchmark, a feel for where the circuit is, to try and maybe second guess what may come up on Saturday when the teams then go through those two 45-minute sessions, the second of which is then critical before the 1 hour of qualifying. And it's at that point they then have to commit to the set of tyres, or the compound of tyre that they feel will be right for them for qualifying, and of course then for 71 laps of the A1 ring.
Looking down over the track, temperature has remained pretty consistent at 24 degrees. Hasn't really changed, hasn't warmed up that much during the course of this morning. It was 25 degrees when we started just before the first free practice session, so no great difference there. And the conditions, as I say, fairly consistent. That rain, which seems to be hovering around in the mountainous region here, hasn't yet fallen, so we've got a dry track for this second free practice session.
Yes, and weather conditions, I mean, they seem to have stabilised. There's a small increase in ambient temperature and track temperature. That will help the Michelin runners, because clearly they have been suffering from a lack of grip, and we could see that the top 10 was being dominated by the Bridgestone runners. David Coulthard, Kimi Räikkönen, very keen to get out. Räikkönen doing not very many laps this morning and struggling really all the way down in 18th place, only 13 laps in total. David Coulthard was the fastest of the Michelin runners in 7th place, and he didn't do very many more laps either. So maybe McLaren just feeling that, well, we've got a certain amount of information from last year, we don't need to do any more unnecessary running. We know that the track is going to get better, track conditions will improve, temperature will come up, and we would expect our relative positions to move forward and change from what we've seen after the first session this morning.
So the Toyota team making their last little preparations for the start of this free practice session, and they've been doing plenty of testing. Now, they have been testing somewhere slightly different to the others. One or two other teams joined them. That was at Estoril in Portugal. Track still being used quite a lot for testing, John, although not a part of the Grand Prix calendar anymore, and it was their test driver Ryan Briscoe who has been doing a lot of the work.
Yes, and Estoril is now, I think it's just been re-homologated as a Grand Prix testing venue, and along with Jerez in Spain, that's also been re-homologated, I understand. And test circuits, of course, teams want to go somewhere where they can be guaranteed of reasonably high temperatures, and ironically it was a deluge of rain in Portugal on one of the days, so great opportunity for Bridgestone, or for Michelin I should say, in their case Toyota, to do some wet weather testing. It's an interesting circuit, very difficult technically for the cars and for the engineers, and that's the kind of feedback that VAR and Toyota were looking for.
Peter, did you have anything to add on that?
Well, not specifically on that point, Ben, but we heard that during the break Sauber sent an email to race control saying that David Coulthard had quite badly cut up Felipe Massa, which caused Felipe to leave the road. No damage to the car, real damage to the car. And sure enough, Charlie Whiting, the circuit director, did have a word to David Coulthard and the West McLaren Mercedes team, and David said, yeah, I just didn't see him. And one has to put that in the context, I think, of DC perhaps being the most conscientious driver on the circuit. He's incredibly courteous usually, and he was very upset to have caused that incident, but certainly DC didn't actually see Massa at that moment.
Right, well, yes, always scary when a car at high speed comes going fairly slowly. Thankfully, it didn't have any too dire consequences, with Massa just bouncing off into the gravel trap, and he'll be ready to come back out. Decent turnout of fans here this afternoon, even for the Friday free practice. You get a lot of Italians coming over the border. It's not too far away from northern Italy, so you can expect to see plenty more Ferrari support once again this weekend.
Well, in fact, Austria, the Grand Prix in Austria, used to be a real mecca for motor racing fans across Europe because of its location. You had Germans, you had Swiss, you had Italians, you had many people coming over from Hungary and some of the, at that time, the communist bloc countries. They were able to get out for the weekend, and what a fantastic place it used to be, particularly the old Österreich ring. The hills around were literally covered in tens and almost hundreds of thousands of race fans.
Peter, have you come across fans from all over the country, all over the world here this weekend?
Yes, a lot more fans here than we've seen for a while, and one of the reasons for that is because there's a new race promoter here, and he's really doing a great job. I think we've had lots of events, lots of media events going on, and they expect the crowds here on Sunday to be at least as big as they were back in '97. So that's very nice. It's a great atmosphere in Austria this weekend, and as John said, it's a very nicely located country, and a lot of Italians here sort of treating it as their fourth race, if you like.
Great, well, we'll look forward to seeing plenty of banners around the track as the weekend develops. There's the Minardi back out onto the track of Mark Webber. Their wing problems, as we heard, all sorted out now, and they can continue with the work here at the A1 ring. They are one of the few teams, actually, who didn't test between the two Grand Prix. Toyota, as we mentioned, busy time in Estoril, and their young test driver, Ryan Briscoe, completed some 274 laps, I believe, which is a huge number. I should think that he's building up his neck muscles nicely by now.
Yeah, it'll be a good old workout for the young Australian. Of course, he's going to compete in Saturday's Formula 3000 event here at the A1 ring as well, and a lot of expectations from Ryan Briscoe. Whether he will become a fully fledged Toyota Grand Prix driver in the longer term will probably depend on how he gets on in Formula 3000 and in his testing role with the Toyota team.
That's right. Well, the man in the driving seat at the moment is Mika Salo, the very experienced Grand Prix driver, and very much a part of the whole development of this new team, and that's why he was employed, to use that experience to best effect.
Yes, during the press conference yesterday, Nick Heidfeld was asked about sort of rumours that he might be thinking or being invited to join the Toyota team, and Nick very quickly put a block on that question, saying, whatever drivers say when they're asked leading and direct questions. But speculation already about drivers who have been very impressed by what Toyota have done, and potentially it's what they have rather than what they've so far shown that is attracting drivers to this Cologne-based team.
Yes, they have some of the best equipment. They've invested in the latest up-to-date wind tunnel machinery and rig testing, so they really do have the equipment necessary to take that team through to the next couple of steps. Now, Jordan had a much better session this first free practice session, with Giancarlo Fisichella ending up 5th fastest and Takuma Sato 6th fastest. Good effort with both cars, and Nick caught up just a second ago with Gary Anderson.
Gary Anderson, probably the best morning of the year so far for you. Dry conditions in 5th and 6th.
Yeah, it's looking pretty good, but there's always time for it to get worse, I think. No, we're quite happy. The balance of the car's not bad. We've got a new front wing here, which works quite well. Well, we've got 2 different front wings here, but we've got a limited supply of each of them, so we're saving the best for later. But yeah, it's okay.
Are these wings, have you tested on the track, or are these all theory wings from the wind tunnel?
We're just from the wind tunnel, actually. We never really got a chance to get them ready in time, which is why we brought the 2 different specifications. But it appears to make the car a lot more consistent and a bit more downforce, so we're going with that.
Because the original wing was based very much on the twin keel idea, as wide as possible, get the airflow. So has that turned out to be sort of a flawed idea?
Oh, it's just the same old deal. Time moves on, you know, and you learn a bit more and do different things. So we're now reacting to that.
Gary, thanks a lot.
Well, in fact, just a second ago, we've seen this man, Takuma Sato, go onto the gravel, and sensibly there, he's brakes and trying to get the gravel out of the side pods and other areas under the car.
Yes, hopefully he's not doing it on the racing line. He is now on the racing line. Let's look and see as he comes up into the low. Yeah, just too late, too hard on the brakes, and well, Takuma Sato didn't take him very long to have it off track, and of course that's up at the Repsmar corner.
Now, Ralf Schumacher looks as though he's had a little bit of a trip wide here. This is through the first corner of the Castrol curve, and he locked that right front and couldn't get it turned in, and right out wide it went. But again, these gravel traps, John, you don't sink into them too much here.
Gravel in Austria appears to be different to that I've seen in other circuits. Certainly it's a much bigger grain than we'd normally expect, and cars are quite easy able to drive over it and out of it. Not, I'd say, what I consider to be ideal gravel. Some circuits now changing course. There's extremely high grip. I gather the new Hockenheim circuit, which will be seen for the first time at this year's German Grand Prix, has on the runoff areas this very, very high grip tarmac, as McNish. And that's a little spin. Is it harmless or not? It is harmless.
Yes, that's down at the first corner area as well. So presumably on the exit of the first corner. He's just looped the back end around, but he's kept the engine running, and off he goes, accelerates away. And you can see the sun's still shining, and that heavy-looking cloud around hasn't, thankfully, come over the top of the track. Let's take a look at what happened to Alan McNish here.
Well, it just simply looks like didn't have enough grip in the rear, just the back end. Car looked very nicely balanced, mid-corner on the exit, then all of a sudden just... That can't have been the curb that he caught, because people are running over the curb, so maybe the tyre temperature was just fractionally down, and Alan spun the car from left over to right, managed to grab the hand clutch and keep the engine running, so he lives to fight another day, or another practice session anyway.
Yes, this session, the final Friday free practice session. We've got Michael Schumacher going quite slowly, but I don't think that's a problem. I think he's just allowing other cars through. And of course drivers may well be experimenting. Oh, we got the Jordan off again, and I think that's Fisichella this time who's gone off, not Takuma Sato. So both Jordans taking trips into the gravel. And
a fairly bumpy ride, and I just wonder that right front wheel, again you can see a lot of camber in the right front, whether that was cause or effect. Again, it's just difficult to have a look and see, because the car did bounce quite violently as he came back. Let's have a look again. Well, he's way offline even coming into the corner. I don't know whether he was just made a mistake. I mean, that's very strange. He didn't even turn into the corner. He was actually off the track before he made the turn into the corner.
Box Giancarlo, box his lap.
Well, I don't think there's too much doubt that he'll be coming into the pits anyway. He's called in by the team, as we see Heinz Harald Frentzen coming around. He's on a pretty good lap here, so we'll see whether this improves his position. 9th currently, and a number of cars on track, and in fact Frentzen has come up to 4th, so that's a good improvement straight away at the start of the second free practice session.
And Ben, what's significant is that the straight line speeds of the arrows are now the fastest in the first and final sectors of the lap. Now that's very, very important here in Austria, to have good top speed, and if you can combine it with a high level of grip and consistency of handling, then you're all quids in.
And we may well see people changing that balance between speed and grip for qualifying, and then back again for the race itself. Looking at Nick Heidfeld, here we are. Heidfeld fast in that early session. He's been pushed back down to 6th. Raikkonen has come up to 3rd. That's a good improvement for the McLaren. So we now have the 2 Ferraris, then Raikkonen 3rd, Frentzen 4th, Massa 5th, Heidfeld 6th, Fisichella 7th, and then it's Sato, Coulthard, and the man he just saw standing in the pit lane waiting to come out, Jacques Villeneuve.
And Heidfeld really getting on with the programme as he came through the Jochen Rindt curve, used the curb on the exit and a little bit of the grass verge as well. Heidfeld doesn't improve on 12.336, he's done a 112.023, but clearly again look at the use of the curb on the exit. That is turn 1, the Castrol corner. Watch Heidfeld this lap, we could see a little bit of an improvement.
Well, he does like this place, there's no doubt. Qualifying 6th here last year was a great effort, and he looks as though he wants to get into that top 6 once again. It'll be tough though, he'll have to challenge the McLarens, the Renaults and the Williams, who will all be pushing Ferrari hard. The Sauber trying to squeeze in there amongst the top teams once again. Rubens Barrichello then, and his first flying lap just a fraction off the pace of his team leader Michael Schumacher's time from the earlier session.
And in fact that was an improvement for Barrichello, although it didn't eclipse Michael Schumacher's time. It was a small improvement. David Coulthard currently 9th quickest, personal best in first sector, nothing special in the second. Coulthard is 9th and remains there by being 0.2 of a second slower than his 9th quickest time.
Support around the track for David Coulthard as he attempts to improve things this season, and having had a run of great results here in Austria over the last few years, the win last year and 4 runner-up positions before that, he has to be looking for another podium finish, but the Williams will be strong too. Let's see what Pablo Montoya's up to. Well, he's using plenty of curb there, as is just about everybody.
Olivier Panis didn't seem to use too much curb, but he went 4th quickest in the BAR, 1:11.972.
Intermediate, first intermediate there, John. Montoya running wide, locking up into Rima's corner. That was the one, of course, where famously he and Michael came together last year. But that first intermediate, he was very close to the Ferrari time.
Well, let's watch what Michael Schumacher does. This is into the Castrol. Let's have a look and see. Oh, Michael. Oh, he certainly got a bit of lock on there, and well, kept the car pointing in the right direction. But you're talking about what we just watched with the back end view. Did step, and again the overreaction. He didn't get the lock off quick enough. But Montoya, what he did was...
Oh, look, and he's off again, John. He's on the grass. This time looked like he understeered wide.
That was done with Gosser. Now, we saw that happen to Raikkonen, and in fact, there was an oversteer caused it to happen. This time we didn't see the replay of what Michael Schumacher did, but Michael pushing very hard now, 1.4 seconds down. He'll just cruise the rest of this lap and restart again.
Of course, he might be experimenting with the other compound of Bridgestone tyre and suddenly discovering it's not as good as the other one he was trying.
He could well have done. But Michael, in fact, in that first sector was fastest of all so far this afternoon now. As we watch Takuma Sato in a corner that caught out his teammate Giancarlo Fisichella a little bit earlier.
You can recognise Sato by the body language of the car more than anything, can't you? The way it twitches around and the way the front wheels are always working at keeping it under control through the corners. Let's watch him down here. Again, you can see those front wheels twitching around, the car making very rapid, jerky movements.
But I must say, Gary Anderson's telling us he's got different wings to try. The Jordan, I think, is one of the best looking cars, one of the best balanced cars I've seen so far in this morning and afternoon session. And maybe more balanced than Eddie is at the minute, because he's firing off in every which direction. So Jordan's, what they need is reliability, number one. What they need is a bit more power from Honda, number two. And they could find themselves finally getting out that no point situation, which has been a real bugbear for the Jordan team. This time last year they had 13 points in the Manufacturers' Championship.
Great view from that infield section. We're watching Michael Schumacher now. They pull 4 Gs of lateral force here through these last 2 corners, and that's amongst the highest G loadings they experience anywhere on any of the Grand Prix circuits. So it really does load up the driver. It's a new fastest time, a 1:10.579.
And that's just a fraction over a second slower than last year's pole time for last year's Grand Prix.
And it's a full 3/4 of a second faster than they managed on the Friday last year. The fastest time last year going to the McLarens, and the Ferraris didn't seem to be so bothered on the Friday, and yet Michael still came through to pole position.
And he's still going through and doing another fastest of anybody through that first sector. Michael Schumacher on a second lap, which on that first sector time indicates he's going to make a further improvement on his current fastest lap.
Yes, and in fact that intermediate time that you can see there set by Michael Schumacher, he has just improved that. So the new fastest intermediate there is 17.549, so Ralph's not too far off, but not as close perhaps as he would like to be. Looking inside the Williams pit, we've got Cora Schumacher in the background, Connie, which is Juan Pablo's fiancée, also there, both of them watching the monitors carefully with Ralph Schumacher. Here we are, on board with him, car ahead of him, and that is Rubens Barrichello.
Well, Ralph's got personal bests in both sectors. With a car ahead of him, he wants to be sure that that doesn't come into play. If Barrichello dives into the pits, it will affect him.
In fact, I think that's Bernoldi just in front of Barrichello, slightly further up the road. So Enrique Bernoldi, the car sliding around a bit ahead of Ralph, and hopefully that won't have affected him too much. Let's see what this does to his time. It popped him right up to 3rd place.
But he's 1.1 seconds slower than his brother in the Ferrari, but certainly a big leap forward for Ralph, for BMW and for Williams.
Well, a few smiles at Williams with an improvement there for Ralf Schumacher. There it is, ahead of Kimi Raikkonen. Olivier Panis still well up in the BAR Honda, and then Heinz Harald Frentzen in the Arrows. Felipe Massa and Nick Heidfeld have been pushed further back in 7th and 8th. Fisichella 9th. Jensen Button is 10th fastest so far. And Peter, do you have any information for us on who's using what tyres at the moment?
Well, I do, Ben, yes, in my very privileged position here on the pit wall. Juan Pablo Montoya goes past on a brand new set of Michelins. Ralph was on new tyres. Michael's still on the used set from the morning session, so very, very impressive performance from him. And Rubens all...
He's certainly just gone a very impressive 4th quickest, and now whether he was on a fresh set of rubber or not, well, maybe Peter wasn't down at that end of the pit lane, but certainly Bernoldi confirming what we know with the Arrows. We've seen it from Frentzen, we've seen it now from Bernoldi. That is one quick car around the A1 ring. Early days still. Let's not get carried away. Ralf Schumacher behind Bernoldi, Now just compare the straight line speeds. Look at the bite, the grip off the corner. Ralph is not able. Look, his hand goes up. Well, what are you talking about? This, I think it's moisture coming out of the back of the arrows. That's maybe what he was complaining about. You could see those spots coming onto the camera and no doubt onto the visor of Ralf Schumacher.
Yes, well, that certainly hasn't helped his campaign at all, but this is Enrique Bernoldi trying to further improve on that already impressive fourth, and in fact he set a slightly better time for himself through the first sector. 30.6 on the second sector. That's about half a second off the lead pace, but this is still a good lap from Bernoldi as he uses every little bit of track and more out onto the curbs through the last two right-handers. And Bernoldi's time, is this a further improvement for him? A 1:12.016, so slightly slower on that last sector, so he stays fourth on the previous lap.
He really only needs to find a tenth of a second to equal Ralf Schumacher's time for third place as we watch Juan Pablo Montoya. Now he makes that long climb up to the Rimas corner. You've seen Montoya lock up many times going up into this corner. In fact, I beg your pardon, he's exited the Rimas. He's coming into the Gosser corner.
Yeah, first split was pretty good. That was nice and tidy there through the Gosser curve. Now back on the power, downhill slightly into these two fast left-hand bends. And there we can see the view from that infield and the countryside as he flashes past the Gerhard Berger curve and now accelerates back uphill towards the final two right-handers. As we mentioned, it is one of the shorter tracks on the Grand Prix calendar.
It's short in terms of lap time. In terms of its lap distance, it isn't anything particularly different. It's 2.6 something miles around. So it's just the nature of the circuit. It's a high-speed circuit.
He goes second fastest there, 11.023. That does put him ahead of Rubens Barrichello. No, it doesn't, because Barrichello's just crossed the line and he's gone second again. So Montoya finds himself just a fraction ahead of his teammate Ralf Schumacher. The two Williams now third and fourth.
And we've just had some 16 minutes of this session, 43 and a bit to go. So it's more like a qualifying session so far this afternoon. But Barrichello, who we're not watching right now, we're watching it, is the William Fisichella and Raikkonen. But Fisichella pulls over, lets Raikkonen through, but Barrichello's fastest in that first sector, continuing, benefiting from the new tyres. Peter Windsor saw him go out on, some 2 laps now ago.
Looking at... Let's check the second sector, and he's up on that as well. It's a personal best, and this could well take him to the fastest time on this new set of Bridgestone tyres. Just hope he gets a clear run out of the last. He's just gone past Alex Jung, who was well out of his way, and Montoya's quite a lot further up the road, so this should be a clear run out of the last two corners. And Barrichello comes across the line and goes fastest, a 1:10.549. 300ths faster than Michael Schumacher.
And possibly in that last sector with cars around him, he may well have shaved another 100th or maybe a 50th of a second off his time. As we look at Kimi Raikkonen, third quickest, fastest of the Michelin runners, ahead of Juan Pablo Montoya in fourth, and Ralf Schumacher. So you've got a pair of Bridgestones and a trio of Michelin in the top 5.
No, it looks like he's pushing this car hard indeed, right out to the white line, using, again, the full width of the track. Look at that, throwing it around. Great confidence from the young Finn as he charges over the line, and that puts Raikkonen third place, a 1:10.657. It puts him ahead again of the two Williams.
Yes, confirming that third place. But you can see how aggressive Raikkonen is through the Jochen Rindt curve, and then through that final A1. The A1, there's almost like a little water gutter, and it's one of those places that maybe you don't want to be so aggressive on, but Raikkonen just grabs the McLaren by the scruff of the neck and just throws it into that corner.
I have to say, it's a really encouraging time, that, John, from Kimi Raikkonen. He's only a tenth of a second slower than Michael Schumacher's time, and only a little slower than Barrichello. We know Barrichello was on a new set of tyres as well. Raikkonen's time putting him ahead of both Williams. It could well be that McLaren, that's always gone well here, could be in much better shape this weekend. We're riding here, of course, with Eddie Irvine.
As he goes into the pit lane, but very close now, the top three, well, covered, you say, just by a tenth of a second. Depends on the amount of fuel that is on board all three cars, that we do not know, but it looks to me as if McLaren have decided, with weather forecasts indicating that there may be different patterns coming in, they want to get some indication as to what they can do. And Frentzen off up at the Remus corner, and Heinz, don't be too aggressive on the throttle, get it back on the racetrack. Now look at the gravel, now he puts the brakes on, showers the track, that's off the racing
bring
line.
it back in, we'll have a look at it.
He's got a fair load of gravel on board, so the team are calling him in. Let's have a look and let's make sure none of it is in areas that would be sensitive. Just misses his braking altogether, far too late in the brakes. The underbody and the vents underneath the car just scoop up that gravel, shovel it into the radiator inlets, and of course, and then Fisichella's off now as well.
Yeah, well, Fisichella getting a little wide. I think that was down at the same area. Heidfeld taking things very steady as he comes across the line. And you can look above, you can see a lot more blue sky now. The temperature climbing as the cloud disappearing. It's getting a lot warmer out there.
And we didn't see it, but Michael Schumacher also has been off at loop 13. That's up at the Gosser curve. We just got it on our data screen. So Michael Schumacher, unseen by anybody, and any of the cameras that we've got, any of the pictures we've got, also made a trip off the track. That's the same corner that Barrichello went off in the first part of our practice this morning.
So Jacques Villeneuve just getting helmeted, but Heidfeld's definitely in some sort of trouble. He's not just slowing for space. Just listen. Doesn't sound good, does it?
No, it does not, and that's on the way up the hill, up to the Remus curve, so he pulls off, lets the car roll back and try and get it a little bit further off the racetrack to ensure that there's no day. Oh, and again, Jordan, that's
Fisichella, I think.
Again.
Yes, Giancarlo Fisichella. Turn one, and this time, because he's gone off at the angle, he's not going to be able to get out of that gravel trap, and that's a great shame. Valuable setup time being lost for the Jordans. We've got yellows out 2 areas of the track, as you can see from our map there. One for Fisichella, bottom left, and the other for Heidfeld.
Well, I'm complimenting Jordan on such a good job of the balance of the car, but there, the back end already getting away from Fisichella just as he came into the apex of the corner. This time comes to a standstill, slid in sideways, built up the gravel underneath the car, and then of course unable to drive the car out of the gravel traps.
End of session then for the Italian, sadly. They won't be allowed to, of course he's not allowed to use the spare car, and they won't be able to get that car back in. So he'll have to sit out the final 38 minutes of free practice and lose a chance to work on the development of the car. Same story for Nick Heidfeld there after a good first free practice session. Things not turning out quite so well for him in this second one. Let's watch the McLarens though. David Coulthard now on track, and he's seen his teammate Kimi Raikkonen set the 3rd fastest time. Good effort as Fisichella walks away and hopefully picks up a ride back to the pit lane. Coulthard himself is 5th fastest currently, 0.4 of a second off the pace of the 2 Williams BMWs.
And then you've got a quartet with Bernoldi, Olivier Panis, Frentzen and Felipe Massa rounding out the top 10, and Bernoldi the best of the rest at this present time.
Coulthard splitting the 2 Williams now, 5th position for him, 11.416, and now going on to a quick lap. Let's see whether we can watch this. The yellow flag is out, of course, in a couple of areas, but the car's well off the track, and you can hear that traction control working hard on the exit of Remus as they accelerate out in 2nd gear. Speed there, 296.7 kilometers per hour, and that's just a little off his best so far, but they may have tried cranking on a little bit more wing, and that can often help you at other areas of the track.
Yes, but it is this anomaly of this particular racetrack. You can put on wing, you can take wing off. It quite frequently has little effect in the overall lap time. It's just the virtue of the amount of straight lines this circuit has, and the fact that most of the corners are very short corners. In other words, you spend very little time in them.
How's it looking from pit lane at the moment, Peter?
Well, I'm next to the Sauber pit stand, as you can see. I asked technical director Willy Ramp there what the news was on Nick Heidfeld. He said all that happened was an alarm light came on in the cockpit, so he switched everything off. They don't have any data because they're not actually monitoring real-time data at the moment. They're only doing it as it goes past the start-finish line, so we'll have to wait until the end of the session till we know exactly what caused the problem with Nick Heidfeld.
Disappointing for him then, as he loses the chance for useful laps here. Ferrari looking like they might be making a steering wheel change, possibly, maybe one of the systems, or just perhaps resetting some of the parameters. They had a little inspection of the steering wheel a moment there. Ross Brawn having a good look with Nigel Stepney checking out something or other on there, John.
Yes, and Ross, to get Ross off the pit wall to come down and have something like look at the steering wheel. Clearly, I assume that's on Michael's car. not happy, and of course there's so much that a steering wheel does, so they've got spares, but whether they decide to run with the original one or replace it, it's difficult just to see right now as we look into Ruben Barrichello as he sits and waits out a few more minutes. Currently fastest of all by some, was it 0.02 of a second from teammate.
Very close indeed. Ralf Schumacher sits. Track temperatures come up to 26 degrees, so a little hotter than it was for the first free practice session, and he's now set to come back out onto the track. Said before this weekend that he's thought that they would be more on the pace with the Ferraris at this track. It's the sort of place that should suit them a little better than Barcelona. They always knew Barcelona was going to be a tough one. That was the way it turned out, although Montoya relieved to come away with it with a second place and 6 points in the Drivers' Championship. Now, what about Renault? Jarno Trulli and Jenson Button both featured very well in Barcelona, of course. Both went out of the race with mechanical problems after what's been a good start to the season for them. And now Trulli finds himself down in 12th position.
But that's better than his teammate Jenson Button, who's down in 14th. But again, Renault, like many teams, they've got a work schedule. Both drivers will do different things. They may then cross-reference between the two drivers, or they may just opt to go with whichever appears to show the most promise, as we ride with Trulli over the crest of the hill and watch him through the Rindt curve.
Interesting when you watch on the onboard, John. A number of drivers seem to give it just a little lift in the middle of that Rindt curve. They seem to get back on the power. It sounds like there's a lift in the middle, back on it again. We heard that with someone else earlier. Interesting watching those onboard pictures.
It's such a critical corner. Oh, and Irvine gets it just on the verge, coming out of the exit of the Niki Lauda curve.
More instructions on what to do on setup.
Irvine showing personal bests, first and second sectors, and a big improvement up to 8th place for Eddie, and well, again probably the result of new tyres and very low fuel loads.
Riding on board with Eddie now, going past a slower moving car. I think that was Alan McNish going fairly slowly, hopefully without a trouble. Now here's his teammate Pedro de la Rosa, the Spaniard spinning out of the Spanish Grand Prix sadly very early on in proceedings. Oh, and somebody else, that looks like one of the Minards that's off the road.
It's Coulthard.
Oh, it's Coulthard, is it? Oh,
it is indeed.
That. Wow. David getting himself into a bit of trouble. I think he's managed to rejoin the track though, so that's good news. And hopefully won't have done any damage. There is Heinz-Harald Frentzen. It's Coulthard right behind him. And yep, everything looks okay. He's back up to speed, so just ran a little wide, I think, that through one of the final corners.
Yes, I think it was through the Rindt curve. There we see, yes, there we go. A little gravelly ride, that allowed Frentzen. In fact, Frentzen was behind, then Coulthard, of course, his tyre still choked with the dust from the gravel trap, and Frentzen with the run and continues all the way up the hill.
Oh, and Ralf spun it. Ralf Schumacher has had a spin, gets passed by one or two other cars, and that's down at the Remus curve as well. And he does a good job of restarting without causing problems for other drivers.
In the meantime, Frentzen has done a personal best in that second sector. Frentzen currently 10th of the field. As we watch Ralf, he'll come back, he may go into the pits. And as well, Kimi Räikkönen. This is Ralph's little moment up at the Remus curve, isn't it?
Yeah. He used a fair bit of curb, didn't he?
A lot of curb.
Normally we see the mistakes there coming in a little too quick. That's what we saw this man do, Frentzen. Difficult braking area, that, John. It's at the end of this next straight that Frentzen's heading towards. You know, they're building up to maximum speed, getting on for 195 miles an hour, and you've got to select your braking point. It's so crucial, isn't it, as you approach here?
Yes, it is. One of those corners, because it's quite a steep, and much steeper than it looks on the TV shot. You can go very deep, but if you go too deep, then you're so committed that the balance between having a margin for error or not is gone. Interestingly, just on a run a lap ago, it was Kimi Räikkönen who set the fastest sector time in that final sector of the circuit, sector 3. Didn't reflect in a lap time, but indication that McLaren are finding some grip now, having maybe made some changes. There we look at Carl Gadden. He was the poor man that was on the lollipop, and Montoya was given the message to go, and of course the fuel hose still connected. Carl here supporting the team this weekend.
Yep, good to see him still there for Williams. Michael Schumacher waits in the pits, second fastest at the moment. Kimi Räikkönen third, Montoya fourth. We've got Frentzen off at the side of the road, and that's again out of that final corner. That's the A1 curve. He may have lost it, but he's got it back on again, and he's kept the engine running, so he rejoins the fray. Meanwhile, Peter's down at the Sauber pit.
Nick, that's bad luck to lose some running time now. Can you tell us exactly what happened there in the cockpit?
It looks like it was a problem with the alternator.
An alternator, something as complicated as a Grand Prix car, something as silly as that.
I didn't...
No, I just think it's a very frustratingly small thing to be going wrong on something as complicated as a Grand Prix car.
Yeah, I mean, luckily we didn't have a lot of problems so far this year. I hope it's going to be okay for the rest of the weekend. Unfortunately, I lost a lot of time now. It just happened right at the beginning.
But you've looked very, very good in the car so far.
Yeah, this morning we were really happy being third and fourth quickest. It's going to be interesting now to watch Felipe, and we have to rely on his data now.
So do you feel much older today, Nick?
No, only 1 day older than yesterday.
Well, congratulations on your birthday anyway. Have a great day on Sunday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Nick Heidfeld having to sit out the rest of this session, under half an hour to go now as we watch his teammate Felipe Massa.
Yes, Felipe currently outside the top 10 in 11th place. He has to shoulder all the responsibility of his own work and that of Nick Heidfeld. So the team will have to focus, and maybe they make some changes in some of the plan that they had for the young Brazilian as we come up to the second half of this 1 hour session this afternoon. Oh, hey, Felipe, you'll not do that very often, my friend, and get away with it.
That was wide, wasn't it? Out of the last corner, he stays 11th fastest. On track at the moment is Juan Pablo Montoya. We saw him come out on new tyres, and indeed Montoya's just set the new fastest mid-sector time. His first sector wasn't that impressive, but the mid-sector has, he's certainly put in a quick middle section, 29.835.
And that's about 0.2 of a second quicker than the fastest lap we've seen so far from Rubens Barrichello. Now, will this be the fastest time of the day for Montoya?
Across the line, no, it's not, but look how close he is, 64 thousandths of a second behind the Ferraris, and particularly of Barrichello as he runs out wide there.
But interesting, he made up all that time in the middle sector, then lost 0.2 of a second to Barrichello in the final sector.
Yes, it was that initial sector where he didn't gain as much as might be expected, and no doubt that's where they'll be looking for a bit of extra speed. Now, Ralf Schumacher also on a lap here. He's put in a personal best in the first sector, but the second intermediate sector, nothing to write home about. So I don't think we'll see any particular improvement from Montoya's teammate. 7th fastest at the moment, stays in 7th place as Michelin continue their work to develop their tyres. Peter, you have something for us.
Well, I have, yes. I'm still in the Sauber garage. There's just a great view here on the spare car of the pickup point at the bottom wishbone, the wafer thin position on the chassis in which it picks up. You can see why it's such a structurally difficult problem to get the twin keel layout to work, and why some teams this year didn't go that route. Teams like Jaguar and BAR are good examples. BAR particularly. Jaguar sort of went that way. And I think it's worth pointing out that once you get in the midfield, it is the twin keel cars like the Sauber and the Arrows that are setting the pace. The top 4, McLaren have it, but in the midfield it is that layout which allows a tremendous amount of air to escape from the front wing effectively that is setting the pace. So perhaps teams that didn't go this route last winter are rethinking for next year.
Development continues at such an amazing pace in Formula One. It's something we heard earlier on from Gary Anderson, but hopefully we can hear from Gary now a little bit more as to what happened with Giancarlo Fisichella, perhaps.
Gary Anderson, Giancarlo Fisichella, an early end to his day today. What happened? Driver error or mechanical problem?
Yeah, I haven't spoke to him yet, but he just spun going into turn 1, obviously into the gravel, and the car stopped. So we don't know what yet. I don't think it's anything too dramatic. There's quite a few people doing that, so we'll see.
You've had lots of dry running time so far this morning. It's rumoured to rain this weekend. How frustrating is that for you, losing this afternoon for Fizzy?
I think we're okay, really. We're quite happy where we were. Obviously losing the time stops you showing the performance, but I wouldn't mind if it was wet. It would be okay.
Gary, thank you.
I'm sure he'd be quite happy. In fact, the Bridgestone tyre still seems to have the edge in the wet conditions, and that may well give Jordan an opportunity to score their first points of the season, as they're chasing so aggressively. Rubens Barrichello comes in. We saw De La Rosa on track go. It's still Barrichello fastest. Sorry, he's coming out, not coming in. Fastest at this stage in free practice from his teammate Michael Schumacher.
Yeah, just going back to that piece from Peter Windsor about the Sauber twin keel chassis layouts, and the two notable teams that chose not to go down that route. Clearly one is Ferrari, and it hasn't hurt their performance in the least. The other are Williams, who no doubt are looking at it, but they will never, knowing Patrick Head, ever do anything that they don't feel they have got a control of from an engineering perspective until they can be 100% confident that mechanically it is bulletproof. Then any aerodynamic gains, then they will chase, no doubt. But look at the Ferrari, it's the antithesis of what everybody else is doing. It's a very, very high nose, and all the aerodynamic work is concentrated around the rear of the car. So whoever's right or whoever's wrong, one thing's for sure, Ferrari is the quickest car on the field, and if they're wrong, well, I hate to see them when they get it right.
Peter, you wanted to add to this discussion?
Well, yeah, I think it's a good sort of round table, perhaps down at the pub discussion. But I think Ferrari perhaps should be excluded from this because they've got so many other good elements that the last thing they needed to do, of course, was to take any sort of risk structurally or aerodynamically. Rory Burns says he did look at the twin keel setup. It didn't appear to be any better. But, of course, they've got a very different package from anybody else on the grid. As we've said, they've got virtually exclusive use of Bridgestones, which is a massive plus point. Beyond that, they've got an incredible back end of the car, as John rightly said, not only in terms of suspension geometry, but also in terms of radiator positioning, rear wing efficiency. And with all that, and with Michael, you know, the risk wasn't worth taking. But I think it's more of an acid test when you get to the midfield, and everybody's struggling a little bit on budgets. And you can see demonstrably different levels of grip between, say, the Arrows and the BAR at this stage.
Well, the battle continues between those midfield runners. It certainly provided us with plenty of entertainment last time out in Spain, and we'll watch for that again this time in Austria. Felipe Massa, the sole remaining Sauber in this session, due to come back out again. We've seen some work going on around the front suspension of his car just a moment ago. Once again, unrivaled access in the Formula One pit garages here on F1 Digital.
A little look at Michael Schumacher, still second quickest behind his teammate Rubens Barrichello, and just a little look as he comes out of the cast. We're looking at the back of the way the suspension, the tyre, very little deflection. I'll spare all those Scottish listeners my Scottish accent, but just to those that are interested in Alan McNish, currently 13th quickest, right now doing a personal best in first and second sectors, and Salo, teammate, down in 18th, so McNish on a track he and Salo know pretty well. In fact, McNish has completed the lap and not improved in 13th. They did that simulation of a Grand Prix here just under a year ago, and probably one of the circuits that McNish is more familiar with than many others that he will visit this year.
So Jenson Button will try a little practice start here in the area that they're allocated. He's on a brand new set of tyres. Now currently Jenson way down in 17th position, but with a new set of tyres on board, he should improve that by quite a huge margin, I would think. This was Michael Schumacher, again running wide. He's throwing more gravel onto the track than just about anybody else.
It just happens that it's his own teammate behind him as well. As McNish battles his way past. And that was Michael Schumacher. It was Barrichello he's battling his way past.
You get one of those bits of gravel, one of those stones in your helmet visor, John, at these sort of speeds. You certainly know about it.
Yeah, I mean, the visors these days are made of they were polycarbonate. They're made of very high resistant materials, and they have to be able to prevent a stone being thrown from the rear of a tyre at substantial speed. One driver many years ago, Helmut Marko, ironically an Austrian, lost the use of an eye after the French Grand Prix in Clermont-Ferrand, where his eye was hit by a stone that penetrated. I think at that time, I'm not sure he was wearing a full face or an open face helmet. And Helmut Marko, better known for running Formula 3000 teams over the last number of years.
Taking a little look at Barrichello, that was, who ran wide just ahead of Alan McNish. But thankfully got it all sorted out and there was no major drama. So Barrichello is fastest with 20 minutes to go, ahead of his teammate. Then it's Montoya, Raikkonen and Bernoldi still going at a good pace. And look at De La Rosa in the Jaguar. He's popped up there in 6th position now, ahead of Coulthard, McNish, who's put together a better lap, as you predicted there, John. 8th fastest for him now. Ralph 9th, then it's Irvine 10th, ahead of Panis, Frentzen, Massa and Heidfeld.
I think Alan McNish, again in that press conference yesterday afternoon, was saying how much he enjoys driving a single-seater racing car and having those open-wheel battles, something that doesn't really occur that much in endurance racing or in sports car racing. And certainly the difference between a sports car and a Grand Prix car is it is an open-wheeler. It is the most pure form of motor racing devised so far, and I hope it remains that way.
McNish stays in 8th position with that lap. Now, this is the man we wanted to watch, because Jensen, as we saw, on a new set of tyres. And let's take a quick look at his intermediate time. Just under a second off the pace of top man Rubens Barrichello, but this will move Button up considerably. The question is, will it put him up with the Williams and McLarens running sort of 3rd, 4th at the moment?
No, it'll certainly pop him up into the top 10, probably around the area. Well, McNish is 8th, Coulthard 7th, 2 Scots. You never think of David Coulthard as being Scot. Well, Button 17th, obviously that lap was...
Maybe
I think he must have backed off in that last sector. 26, I'm just looking to see the time. He did back off in that last sector, in fact.
Maybe trying to get a bit of clear space for the next lap, but not really getting a chance to show perhaps what he can do, as we look at Pedro de la Rosa inside the Jaguar pit once again.
A little bit more front downforce for Pedro de la Rosa, 6th quickest. So deciding he wants a bit more front bite. The problem, of course, is he probably wanted to pull the low speed corners, and then he'll have just to be very, very careful on those middle corners in the circuit where it's so easy to get the car out of shape through the Niki Lauda. We've seen people run wide on that, then through what they now call the Berger corner, used to be called Powerhouse. So put it on for the low speed, you'll hurt in the high speeds.
Looking down the bottom of the list, Takuma Sato's down in 19th position. He's done some 33 laps as Bernoldi, that is this time, going very wide over the curve, at the Castrol curve. The two Minardis are at the back of the field, a 13.2 from Webber, and that's 6/10 of a second slower than Jacques Villeneuve, who's the next slowest. But as we expected, really, Minardi will tend to struggle on this track, which needs lots of horsepower.
4/10 of a second down in that first sector for Enrique Bernoldi. Look at that fastest 305 up in, matching almost to the 1 km per hour that of Rubens Barrichello, the fastest of all, into the Gosser corner. So Enrique Bernoldi not showing a personal best in that first sector, not showing a personal best in the second sector, nevertheless still in contact. Whether it's enough to, well, he's got to find something like 6/10 of a second to put himself 4th quickest. Kimi Raikkonen currently there, but only pushing very hard, doing a very good job all year.
He is, in fact, and in fact he likes this track. He enjoyed it last year. He had his best qualifying position of the year here in 15th place, just ahead of his experienced teammate Jos Verstappen, and he does look very, very strong here today. At the moment he's 5th fastest, just the way that he seems to have confidence in the car now, and that's showing in terms of pace. Niki Lauda and Günther Steiner at Jaguar, keeping a close eye on proceedings, and Niki, former winner himself here of the Austrian Grand Prix.
Niki and Gerhard Berger and many, many other Austrians were not here yesterday. They were in a small Austrian town of Gars, which was the home of Willy Dungel, who tragically died last week. Willy Dungel was the guru for Niki Lauda when he was making his recovery from his injuries in the 76 German Grand Prix, and then became the trainer at McLaren when I was there. Fantastic man, and certainly gave me an insight into the value of diet and training in combination, and really helped so many other drivers of that generation of the 80s and even into the early 90s, and had a fitness centre in the town of Gars, which of course is publicly or government supported. Wonderful place, recommended to anybody.
Well, very sad that Willie is no longer with us. Had a great influence really on the preparation, the physical preparation of Formula One drivers, and it's something of course that Michael Schumacher has continued with his own fitness and nutrition regimes. But Willie Dungle was really one of the first people to get so involved in that.
In effect, Willie Dungle was the pathfinder, as was Ron Dennis. I mean, give Ron credit because he's easy to have a pop at. Ron Dennis said at the end of 82, "You two guys, I'm spending millions of dollars to find half a second. What are you two fat slobs doing? Nothing. We're all going to contribute," he said, "to provide Willie Dungle with the means to come to each race, to have a training program." And we all divvied up, including Ron, and the team and two drivers, Nicky Lauda and myself, benefited from Willie Dungle's involvement, and Willie then remained with McLaren for many, many more years. And then his juniors came into the team and fulfilled that role, and his importance in Grand Prix racing will go down in my book as being pretty significant.
How did it help you as a driver, John, that sort of training, that sort of regime? How did it actually show itself in terms of driving a racing car?
I think it gave you a sense of, first of all, self-belief, higher self-esteem. Once you realised what your potential was, some drivers need a bit of a hand to get underway, others are more self-sufficient. Certainly in my case, I was a real discovery, and I realised that by mixing diet and training, that you could take more, you could give more, and it was something for nothing in effect.
Lovely onboard view with David Coulthard. Now, we saw him come out of the pits a moment ago. He is on a new set of tyres. Coulthard's gone through the first intermediate, not particularly quickly, and in fact, he's a little bit wide there. Gets it all together. He's 7th fastest at the moment, and looking to challenge Kimi Räikkönen, his teammate, who's 4th fastest, about a second quicker at this stage.
A little wobble, maintains that deficit just still around the 4.5 tenths of a second. But Kimi Räikkönen really is giving David Coulthard a workout this season. And of course, Räikkönen is the long-term future of McLaren. What David Coulthard's future is, well, he's got a contract, understandably, for next year. Runs wide, personal best in terms of speed in that second sector, but 1:11.694, 2 tenths of a second slower than his 7th place time.
Yeah, and let's watch this next lap, but I would have thought we would have seen an improvement on that lap. Let's see Michael Schumacher coming through Remus a moment ago, and again running wide and getting it back together, and this is the replay from the onboard camera.
Well, Michael comes in, it looks reasonably good, and then just seemingly lacking grip on the exit, straightens the car up, drives it off the curb, kicks up the dust. And well, this lap obviously just a lap we'll have to think about and start the process all over again as we go into the pits in Hindhauer Fenton, waiting to go out with some 12 minutes and 45 seconds remaining. So Heinz and the Arrows team looking to go out and get one more 3-lap run in, whether it's on fresh rubber or whether they'll just use what they've been using up, the 3 sets that are available for today, and then worry about what they might do come Saturday.
Eddie Irvine on track then, and currently Irvine finds himself in 10th position, so that's reasonably promising. De La Rosa still 6th fastest, but the two Jaguars probably running a bit lighter than some of the competition here, as we'll expect them to be slightly further down come qualifying tomorrow.
Just interesting, McNish, I was going to say he could eclipse David Coulthard, he has done so. McNish has gone 4th in the Toyota, 1:11.158, and his fellow countryman on a 1:11.416.
Of course, it's interesting, John, when you look at the performance of the Toyota and the Jaguars, both relatively looking better here. It's a bit more like Brazil, where again both of those cars seem to have a slightly better performance than expected from some of the other tracks. It's all about these long straights, stability under braking, reasonable traction, rather than getting the maximum downforce from the car.
Well, I think the downforce factor is not the key factor to this circuit. What is a factor clearly is tyre temperature, and with the ambient going up and the track temperature going up, and Irvine, well, he has improved up to 9th place, or certainly improved in time rather than improved in position. But it's again, I think, just a factor of feeling the grip. You will feel it instantly, and when it comes, then you will go quicker. It's as simple as that.
Well, if we can take the comparison further and say if they were quick in Brazil, they'll be quick at the A1 ring, then that would be good news for Williams. Of course, Montoya had the contact with Michael Schumacher at the start of that Grand Prix, and that put paid to Montoya's race, but Ralf Schumacher was able to hound Michael throughout the latter stages, and that might well indicate that Williams will be in better shape here. But it's always difficult to draw conclusions from other tracks. The tyre companies move the battle on further each time, and every track we go to, they've got a new compound of tyre which can completely change the statistics and who's likely to be fast. Right on board with Montoya, up towards Remus curve here.
And you really do have to slow it down, because if you overrun into Remus, you will run wide in the exit, and you'll be probably off the track in the gravel. And Pablo Montoya made a brave effort to stave off Michael Schumacher last year's Grand Prix, and the result was that Montoya just lost momentarily control, and Michael had no option but to go off track with Montoya. Michael wasn't very happy about it. Well, I think that's what motor racing's all about. (18,200 RPM).
Great, isn't it? And he come over the rise there, and the car accelerates even more down into that quick right-hander.
Then you can see that guttering in that A1 curve. They ride the curve, then you got that metal guttering, and that's why the cars look so unstable as they really thump a wheel into it.
So 112, 114 on a used set of tyres for Montoya. But, well, if we think back to what Michael did earlier on a used, quite a lot quicker, but then who knows how much fuel. Montoya probably carrying a good amount of fuel on board that car at the moment.
Coulthard showing a small improvement currently in that second sector of the circuit. We dive into Ferrari and watch Ross as they work. If you rejoin, this is David Coulthard through the Niki Lauda curve. Now we wait to see. Not a personal best, so any improvement from David Coulthard probably going to be very marginal. It is Pedro de la Rosa just ahead of him, again just under a tenth of a second. So David Coulthard could see small improvement as he goes through Jochen Rindt curve.
Had to give it a bit of a
watch
lift
the
there.
curving, watch this. See the gutter?
Well, he certainly had to lift a bit through the first of those two right-handers. Crossed the line on 1:11.882. And Alexander Wirth, test driver for the McLaren team, watches. He's been doing a fair bit of work over the last couple of weeks again, testing at Valencia. David also joined him for that test there, and Wirth's giving the team some great feedback and helping them develop the car.
And Wirth's somebody who has also got his eye on being pit driver once again, and he's very impressed also, as I think everybody in the pit lane is, with this team Toyota. Alexander Wirth has been the third driver, not test driver, third driver in McLaren, set scintillating times in testing in Valencia. Realises that, you know, all the skill and all the speed we saw from him in his early career when he was at Benetton hasn't gone away. He wants to be back as a regular Grand Prix driver, and this is the team I think he really would like to be a part of.
Well, I think a number of drivers have their eye on a possible seat at Toyota, but what about this man? Alan McNish is doing a pretty good job at the moment, just hasn't had an awful lot of luck go his way. Team boss Ove Anderson keeping an eye on things. Let's just take a look at this replay. What happened to Jacques Villeneuve? Well, he ran wide, that's what he did, and he managed to gather it together and get back onto the track.
Do you know why he ran wide? Because when he turned in, he knew if he put any more lock on, he's going to spin. So he just had to keep the wheel at a constant arc. That's why he went so wide and went on the gravel.
Peter, what have you got for us in pit lane?
Well, I've been having a lot of fun up here on the pit wall, watching them exiting the last corner here and listening to the gear changes as they go down the straight here. There's no question that the two Renaults seem to be running different ratios to everybody else. They're grabbing top gear about halfway down the straight, and they just sit there with the revs pulling slightly. Everybody else grabs top just before the road starts to go uphill again. And I can only assume that Renault are running a 6-speed gearbox, and everybody else, except Minardi, I have to say, Minardi about the same as Renault in terms of where they grab top gear. Minardi and Renault probably with 6-speed gearboxes, which is a lighter, smaller thing, and everybody else running 7 speeds.
Peter, I think part of the reason that Renault have got a 6-speed gearbox is because the torque curve of that Renault engine, that very unusual engine, is quite different again to other teams. So they've got more bottom end power, more ability to pull the car out of a corner. Consequently, they don't need 7 speeds, and that's possibly why they've got again these different ratios.
Yep, I think that's probably very true. It's difficult to believe that the torque band on the Renault is actually greater than that of, say, Ferrari or BMW, but obviously they're very confident, and it seems to be working well for them. Well, in general, we've got to find out what's going on today with them, of course.
Yes, at the moment they haven't shown any particular turn of pace. Button down in 12th place as we see Ben Oldie running wide here, and Trulli down in 16th place. So that's a little lower than we might perhaps have expected to see them, but we may well see more improvements as we go through into qualifying tomorrow. Now, on board with Kimi Räikkönen. Had to take a little second stab at turning in there.
Yeah, not the best for a good time. You can hear how fast the engine revs, pulling the gears. His teammate Coulthard has shown an improvement in that first sector, so has Olivier Panis in the BAR. But for Kimi, this lap is not going to see any improvement. 17.9 as opposed to 17.4, which is the quickest that first sector has. Coulthard, no improvement in the second sector, and no improvement for Panis either. As we watch Raikkonen as he comes through this long, look at it, sweeps down through the Jochen curve, then into the A1 curve. Raikkonen takes big bites at the apex, really aggressive, tries to sort of drag a time out of the car.
Coulthard across the line there, and a 1:12.909 for him. Let's see what time Raikkonen does on fairly worn tyres, I think, by the looks of things, across the line, and he does, well, that's a slow time, a 1:15.136.
And he lost it, of course, up at the Remus corner. We saw him run wide, and consequently he probably just backed off. Now he's back on it again. We'll soon see whether he's made any improvement on time, personal time, or any improvement. 1:17.906, and that's again 0.4 of a second away from the fastest that we've seen so far this afternoon.
Yes, and he continues around. We've only got less than 4.5 minutes in this session remaining. Of course, Kimi has qualified 5th for every Grand Prix so far this year, so I'm fairly sure he's fairly determined to try and get a better grid slot this time. David Coulthard, his teammate, he's had a bit of an up and down season himself. Best qualifying position so far has been 4th on the grid. He's been 4th a couple of times, hasn't yet had a front row start this season, and there's really, that's an indicator that the fact that McLaren Mercedes just don't quite have that race winning pace at the moment.
This should see an improvement for Coulthard, but it doesn't, because he had a pretty good first sector. He's only a 10th of a second down on the best so far. Also Pedro de Rosa, he's out, going very well. His first sector time an improvement. We go back to Michael Schumacher. On that long climb up the hill, up to the Remus corner. 17.5, 17.897, 3.5 tenths, 3 3/4 tenths away.
So a little bit off at the moment, but remember, he will also be using worn tyres as the session draws near to its conclusion. There's been some frantic work going on down here in the Arrows pit to try and get Heinz Harald out for the last bit. They obviously had some work to do. He did run off the road earlier, remember, and they may have been having to clear out the gravel before getting back onto the track. And you can see everybody doing their own role. Everybody has a very specific role as a Formula 1 team mechanic, and that was a good example there, John. A lot of people working on the car, but everybody in their own very specific job.
Well, watching Montoya again, preparing to go out, the clock's ticking away. I mean, I don't know how long they're going to need to do a lap. Down the pit lane, out the pit lane. They've got a lap, let's say they've got to get around in 1 minute and 30 seconds, so they've probably just got a little over a minute before they need to be on track. Lots of greens coming up on the data screen, also purple. Rubens Barrichello once again confirming how much he's in love with his new Ferrari.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Rubens Barrichello flying every time he gets in it. Now Ralf Schumacher is coming across the line, a 1:12.3, no improvement in time, but he's on fairly worn tyres, 10th fastest currently, as Patrick Head takes a good look at the monitor. And Rubens Barrichello, here you are, John.
He's Salo ahead of him, and unfortunately he's had to back out of it because, and Barrichello's come in, they decided not to bother. It was a personal best in that second sector. Undoubtedly would have seen an improvement on that 1 minute 10.549, but they've decided to forget it, and there's no point just wasting a lap to do another lap. So there it is, Rubens Barrichello remains fastest. Michael Schumacher out on track. He will have one lap, final lap when he comes across this line to try and do what he's done in San Marino and in Barcelona, and that's to end up quicker than his teammate.
So Barrichello pushed away, that is it for him, as you say, and we'll just wait and see whether Michael Schumacher bothers to do anything at the end of the session to try and go faster. There's not a lot of gain for him to do that. We're just seeing 1 or 2 improvements further down the order as well.
Oh Pedro, what are you doing? You go off in your team principal's corner. He's staying out of the way. There's traffic behind him. It goes through. That was Alex Young. As Barrichello gets out of his car.
He'll be pretty happy with today's work. And look at that front tyre. That's seen some wear.
Yeah, well, that's because of the amount of camber. The inclination of the top of the wheel in relation to the bottom of the wheel. as Peter explained, because the construction and the design of the Bridgestone tower is more rounded than that you see on the Michelin of Montoya, who locks it up very gratuitously as he comes into the Remus corner, and maybe Connie will be a little bit chastising of him tonight for wasting a lap. Pablo still third quickest, but you know, he's pushing it right on the limit. 21 seconds remaining, and Heinz-Harald Frentzen spits flames out of the back, and he also
doing it again.
Yep, up the Remus corner.
Oh, those boys have worked hard to get him back out for him to try and get a quick lap at the end, and he still can't get his braking point.
Guys.
And an apology on the radio. Did you hear that?
He's almost turning, and he's still got the brakes on. Montoya is so hard on the brakes into that Remus corner, catching him out and everybody else. So much his Heinz-Harald Frentzen was flying lap, and he'd hoped that he might have seen an improvement. Frentzen currently 13th and will remain there. He had a personal best actually about 2 seconds before he got on the brakes, and then he throws it away in the gravel.
Well, he had the decency to apologise to the team over the radio after all their frantic activity to get him back out. The checkered flag is now out on this session, and Rubens Barrichello ends the first day here in Austria as fastest by just 0.03 of a second over this man. Michael Schumacher had to take a bit of a strange line there.
Well, Jacques Villeneuve crawling out of the Castrol corner. Michael had to really pull in the steering wheel. Now what Michael, I don't know what Michael thought Villeneuve was doing. I don't know what Villeneuve thought Villeneuve was doing either.
Now let's take another look. Oh, Villeneuve had a spin just a second ago there, and that was coming out of the penultimate corner. Got himself back together, and perhaps was just wary that his tyres had lost some grip up at that first corner. Maybe didn't realise Michael Schumacher was coming up on him so quickly.
Well, Jacques certainly a seeker of thrills in his motor racing. That one will certainly tickle his thrills a bit, I think.
Michael Schumacher will still complete this lap, still pushing hard, despite the fact that he must come in at the end of the lap. You can always learn from the sector times whether something has made a difference to the speed of the car.
One driver who has made an improvement on his final lap is Takuma Sato. He had been down in 20th place, and he's done a substantial better job. He's gone to 10th quickest, so Jordan salvaging something for Sato, but also for Fisichella, who you may remember we saw beach the car on the gravel on the exit of turn 1.
So the session comes to a conclusion, and it's a 1-2 for Ferrari once again. The F2002 chassis remaining unbeaten, but will that be the same story in qualifying? We're going to have to wait and see when the weather conditions will be a determining factor as well. But the interesting thing is to see Montoya third fastest. We always know Williams run the cars very heavy, and he wasn't far off that Ferrari pace. That's encouraging for close competition up front and the battle between McLaren and Williams. And I would have expected to see Renault and Sauber up there. Well, certainly Sauber up there in the first part of the session, not so much in the second part. Good effort from McNish, fifth fastest there. De La Rosa, seventh in the Jaguar, sort of confirming that those two teams on this type of track can sometimes pull something out of the bag, as they did in Brazil. Ralf Schumacher ended up down in 12th, Frentzen 13th, but look at the two Renaults, slightly further down than we might have expected. Jenson Button 14th and Giuliano Trulli down in 17th place, just ahead there of Giancarlo Fisichella. Then it was Mika Salo, Alex Young and Mark Webber, and Jacques Villeneuve, yes, in 21st place, then Mark Webber in 22nd position. As ever, difficult to draw firm conclusions from Friday free practice, but still, once again, you have to say Ferrari are looking favourites for victory here.
Well, I think what I could conclude from this session is that Ferrari remain dominant, but principally everybody else is a real mix and match.
Well, we've got a chance now to look back over the highlights of free